Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Intimacy. When I say that word, what instantly comes to mind? For many people, it's sex. And yes, sex can be a form of intimacy, but you can have sex without being intimate, and you can be intimate without having sex or any physical contact for that matter. And I think that's part of the problem in many relationships, because what is thought of as intimacy is just one small slice of what it actually is. So if you or your partner think of intimacy as the same as sex, you might be missing out on what is truly possible for your relationship. So to help unpack what intimacy is and help you get more of it in your marriage, I'm joined by Dr. Catherine Aponte. She's a clinical psychologist and the author of the book, A Marriage of Equals, How to Achieve Balance in a Committed Relationship. So, Dr. Aponte, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this really important topic.
Well, I'm delighted, Leslie, to have an opportunity to speak to you and share some of my thoughts about intimacy.
Yeah. So you wrote a recent article that appeared at the Good Men Project titled, How to Enhance Intimacy in Your Relationship. And, of course, that caught my eye immediately. Can you provide a definition for what intimacy actually is?
Well, how I think about intimacy is as an interpersonal interaction between the couple, between partners or a marital couple. I don't see it as a thing. I see it as an ongoing process between people, and sort of what you say, what people seem to get wrong about it is that, as you've noticed, that their notion of intimacy is too limited, and sometimes think of it as more like having sex, having some event happening, whereas I see it as an interpersonal process that is an ongoing activity between husband and wife or partners.
Well, and I love that idea because, I talk about intimacy with my couples as, there is physical intimacy, that's true.
Of course.
I talk about emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, spiritual intimacy. There's all kinds of ways to be intimate, and we are actually have some level of intimacy with people who aren't necessarily our spouses, although we do, like many of us, like to keep the physical intimacy within our relationship. But people who we're really good friends with, there's a certain level of intimacy. So,
right.
I like the idea that it's kind of more of an action or a thought process. Is that kind of? Right?
I think the important thing is to think of it as a process, and it's a dynamic. It's a dynamic interaction, and one that involves. First of all, one partner or person disclosing or sharing something about themselves, and then the partner attends to that disclosure. For example, in the article that I wrote, I talked about a fellow, I called him Lucas, disclosing a personal worry he had about something important to him at work. And his wife, whom I call Sarah, invites further conversation by paying attention. So the dynamic is self-disclosure by one partner and paying attention by the other. So in some ways it's rather simple, but that is the dynamic. That's the nature of the process that occurs that sets the stage for intimacy to occur. So it's a kind of interaction that promotes intimacy because one of you reveals something personal about yourself. Your partner responds attentively to this disclosure. The interaction can become reciprocal, which encourages more intimacy. And then intimacy supports the continued disclosure and paying attention to each other.
Well, and and as you were talking about this, I'm thinking about all the ways that this goes haywire. And sometimes it's starting just with the person who you talk about. And so I'm assuming that description what you just described is what you described in the article as an intimate interpersonal interaction, and that
exactly
what you're saying.
Right, exactly.
That's the basis for real intimacy.
And well, those are the elements. I think you can think of those as the elements, the interpersonal elements, the self-disclosure and the paying attention.
Okay. And so, but you started out and you talked about, I guess it was Lucas who comes up and says something, and about something that he's struggling with at work, and you use
right.
the V word, the vulnerable word, and that seems to be where a lot of people get scared. Since Brene Brown's TED Talk, and and those of us in the business have been talking about vulnerability for a long time, but she kind of put a spotlight on it a few years back with her TED Talk about the importance of vulnerability. But it is a scary thing to do.
Well, yeah, and I certainly know of Brene Brown. My concept of self-disclosure really follows a psychologist back in the 70s, actually, a fellow by the name of Sidney Girard, who studied this. And he talks about it as being transparent, about allowing others to see you. And I assume that is really what people are talking about, that is taking a vulnerable stance to allow people to see you and to be transparent about yourself. And I like the word transparency because it's relevant in today's world.
Absolutely.
But it is, so I think another way of thinking about what you're saying is that it is a risk to, in fact, be transparent and to expose yourself. But you really cannot have intimacy if you do not have that.
Well, and that's and then as you're also describing it, and I was kind of flipping the genders here, which maybe I shouldn't do.
Right. No, absolutely.
But I do know that sometimes when I'm thinking about a very standard interaction between a man and a woman, where a woman will say, come share something, a challenge that she's having, and then the man wants to fix it.
Right, and that's what paying attention, and I really go into that in the article, and that is paying attention has nothing to do with fixing it. Paying attention is not being empathetic, it's not understanding, it's not being helpful, it's not fixing anything. Paying attention in the way that it's been described that I like is paying attention is noticing something without trying to change it, not trying to, as you say, fix it. And here's some other ways of describing attention. It's patient and it's kind. Okay, there's no rush, no burden, no criticism. So that if that self-disclosing person is willing to take that initial risk and the responder is paying attention as opposed to empathizing, which is a different phenomenon and much more complex, or without fixing, then the dynamic between these people is set for intimacy, for further self-disclosure, paying attention, and that being a reciprocal process between the couple.
And so the way you describe the intimate interpersonal interaction in the article is that one person does this, the other one pays attention, then they so it's this reciprocal process of disclosure, paying attention, disclosure, paying attention.
But it has to be Leslie, it has to be an organic process. I am very anti-transactional, tit for tat notions about relationships. And in my, I have a blog, which you'll allow me to promote a little later. I have a blog on Psychology Today, and I talk about what the difference between interacting and transacting in one of the posts that I wrote. That's a very, very fundamental, profound thing, and much too much advice to couples right now is of a transactional nature, and I am really do not promote that.
Yeah, and I'm probably right there with you, because this idea that if I do something for you, then that means you have to do something for me. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about in terms of the
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. The quid pro quo, which we all know now, and what that quid pro quo is the philosophical and psychological and historical basis for that is based on self-interest. And so your only goal is to, in fact, get what you want, and you're willing to trade to get it. And then, unfortunately, when people don't realize it is, well, if all your only value to me is what you give to me, then you're exchangeable, you're disposable, and my interest is only in myself. So this is, it's reciprocal as opposed to transactional. And it's an organic process. You know, you can help describe that organic, perhaps even better than I can, but it just flows naturally because of your natural interest in what each other is saying. You're wanting to disclose to this partner because you feel in the hands of somebody who is willing to listen, to help, support, etc. And the other person is interested in what you have to say and wants to be there to be of whatever help that you define is helpful.
So, as you're talking about this, I had this thought that in going back to what I was talking about, as many people think of intimacy as sex or physical interaction, that would almost kind of fall into that transactional kind of framework that you were describing, which is so limiting.
Yes, it is. And I think that a lot of advice about sex is transactional, and it's partially transactional because it's too grounded in I don't know what kind of word. I got to be careful what kind of language I use. About old ideas about sex, what is female sex and what is male sex, what is desire, what is masculine or male desire and female desire. And again, I write about some of this, and I write a lot about this in the book, actually. And there's new research that shows that we have much too much limited ideas about what male desire is and what female desire is. And if, in fact, you set up too much of a differentiation, because I am not I do not promote strong gender differentiation as the basis for traits, as the basis for how you interact, as the basis of how you live your life. And if you set up too extreme differences between men and women with respect to sex, you force them into an exchange model by definition.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and the thing that I like about your description about intimacy being this intimate interpersonal interaction that flows organically is that because that creates a sense of connection and a sense of transparency, as you so nicely put it, that then makes anything physical flow more organically and more. I mean, I know that this is one of the challenges in terms of, if we're talking about male-female desire kind of thing, about, this whole, the feminine side of it is wanting that connection. And the truth of it is that men want that connection too. That's
absolutely.
The idea that we split this out in some kind of weird, way. It's like men want that connection too.
Absolutely, they do. Now, it may be a more risk-taking act for them simply because of early training and so forth. But then again, that whole gets to being willing to be vulnerable. And the other thing that predates self-disclosure, I think, is self-awareness. And, one has to have a process. And, again, I talk a lot about self-awareness and how to understand yourself and how to understand what your own personal reactions are that can disrupt any kind of organic process between couples. Is there your own historically grounded personal reactions, what we typically call taking something personally. And I talk a lot about that in the book and really describe how you can get out of that. So there's some work that may need to be done in a coupleship if either one of you find yourself unable to be vulnerable because of personal fears or reactions, right? So, but those are like the precursors to being able to do this, to be willing to take the risk, to be vulnerable. And then once you can do that, you can set up this kind of wonderful process of intimacy as this dynamic between the two of you.
Absolutely. This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with author and clinical psychologist Dr. Catherine Aponte about intimacy and its importance in a committed relationship. And if intimacy, or more to the point, lack of it, is an issue in your marriage, please understand you're not alone. But it doesn't have to stay that way. And if you would really like to do something about it, then I invite you to take a moment and contact me to schedule your free, no-obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After strategy session. You can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N is in Nancy, C is in Charlie.com. Or you can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. And I want to get back to this really terrific conversation about intimacy. Catherine, I know we talked a little bit before the break about the two concepts of self-disclosing and then the concept of paying attention. And I know that you describe them as important aspects of intimacy, but can you delve a little bit deeper into each one of those?
Well, I think self-disclosure may include things like talking about your own personal history, important life milestones, past positive as well as negative or traumatic experiences, failed relationship, fears, and the importance of those are very personal feelings, experiences, and thoughts. And when we do that, we set the stage to create a bond with the other person. So I think that that's an important aspect of who we are that we want in an intimate relationship. That's what we want to be able to do, is share our personal experiences, good and bad, healthy, not healthy,
right.
whoever we are, and have somebody, again, like you were pointing out earlier, that you don't try to fix it, and you don't try to overly too quickly empathize. You just pay attention. When I say, and I want to emphasize, when I say just pay attention, that is a very profound thing to do, to be able to pay attention to a partner's most intimate thoughts and feelings.
Well, because as somebody self-discloses to you, that can bring up your own stuff. And isn't that what gets in the way of actually just being able to sit and pay attention?
Right. And this again is that business of when you start to feel yourself, if you start to feel yourself taking something personally, you really need to stop and step back and take some time out of that interaction. Let your partner know what you're doing. You take some time out. But when you take time out, you don't just let time pass. You then think through what is going on with me. And again, in my book, I talk a lot about what the nature of that process is. And allow yourself, when you're ready, to go back, paying attention, to be non-judgmental. Take the time to learn what Lucas is experiencing and what he would like from her. And one of the interesting things that can happen when you really listen to a partner, either in being intimate or really even in more concrete discussions about issues, if you pay attention without being judgmental or without trying to fix things or without trying to overemphasize, what you find is you learn a lot about that person that you may not have been aware of, and you learn about things that in life or events that you might not have known about yourself. So you increase your own knowledge by listening to your partner.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know before the break you were talking about the importance of self-awareness in being able to self-disclose, because I can't disclose something that I'm not aware of to start with. Although in some respects I do believe I am disclosing non-verbally.
Yes, right. I think that for me the most important thing to become self-aware, probably two different kinds of things. One is that notion of, and I take a different perspective on how you identify that. I really do think that whenever you get annoyed, irritated, pissed, miffed, angry, unhappy, fearful, etc., that you are reacting personally. And you have to step back. You cannot project that out onto the other person. You have to step back and take an inventory. And in my book, I have a very clear inventory with instructions on how to go through that and process that. And every time you do that, you become more self-aware. The more self-aware you become, the more you can pay attention. The more you pay attention, the more you will learn not only about your partner, but about things that he knows that you may not, or she knows that you may not know, so that you expand your whole notion of the world by listening to your partner.
Well, and that really addresses what I consider to be one of the biggest challenges of marriage, is that you have these two people who up until the point that they meet each other have had two extremely different experiences, and even once they're together, they don't experience the same thing the same way. And
exactly.
It's how do you deal with that? And you just gave this wonderful description of how to be. I mean, and I talk about becoming curious about your partner.
That's an excellent description. Excellent. Excellent language.
And that really does, because if I could become curious and interested, that goes into I'm willing to pay attention.
Exactly.
And because I'm seeing this as not just an opportunity to learn about you, but to learn about the world and learn about me as well.
Exactly.
As opposed to, you're doing something different. Stop it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Brilliant analysis. I love it. And one thing, as we get a little close, I want to ask and answer the question: does intimacy matter? Is it worth making the effort to go to all of this to increase the intimacy in your relationship? And I think it does matter. And here are a few things that intimacy research has shown intimacy seems to be related to. It increases caring about another person, which we've alluded to. It fosters self-awareness in yourself and in your partner, which we've alluded to. It lowers the defenses on both partners, which we have not directly said, but certainly alluded to. And it reduces, I think this is very important, it reduces self-doubt and self-reproach in both partners. How wonderful is that?
Can you talk a little bit more about that aspect, how increasing your intimacy does that? Because that's one of the things, I mean, if I could, and I do this to myself. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't do this, but the way we talk to ourselves is really harsh.
Yes, yes.
And if there's a way to stop, to be a little bit more generous, both to our partners and to ourselves, I want to hear it.
Well, I think the very process of self-disclosure about those kinds of intimate things and having somebody not judge you, not evaluate you, not try to fix or change you, but just pay attention and find interest in what you do and value what you do enhances that experience. Or I don't actually like this word, but I'm going to use it, validates that experience. Right? So I think it is that validation of one's personal experience by a trusted partner that you value then is the key to reducing that self-doubt and self-reproach.
Okay, so and one of my personal goals, and you've talked about this before, is to try to manage my judgment, really to actually try to let it go. And I think that's kind of like my own little personal, okay, this is my quest in life, is to let go of being judgmental, both of myself but also of other people and of myself as well.
Right.
And so I think that many couples and people start out in their relationships frequently testing this, and as we've been talking, I've been thinking very clearly about when my husband and I first met, and there was something that I needed to tell him, and I was terrified of telling him, and it was like I built this thing up, and then when I told him, he laughed. He didn't laugh at me. He just kind of laughed. He goes, "Is that all that was?" Because this whole build-up, it's like, this is all this is. Because this is not a problem. But it was. It was. I think it was at that moment that I knew I could trust him.
Right. However, I would also, in that kind of a situation, ask you to inquire what was the nature of that fear, because that's going to point to something in you that you feel vulnerable about. And while we can
reject me. Yeah, I was but then it would be a deal breaker.
But then you have to look at what is that experience of rejection about? Where does that come from? Because he can disapprove of you or disapprove of something you do. That is not rejection. If you experience that as rejection, that's your personalized interpretation of that, and that's what you have to look at.
And so I'm going to guess that sometimes instead of somebody looking at that, they project that onto their partner.
Right, exactly. And the other thing is, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
and because if you don't look at that yourself, then you have to go back and back each time you feel that self-doubt or that fear of rejection. You have to get that external approval. And you need to be able to give that to yourself.
Which is where a lot of challenge comes in, because a lot of people do look to their partners for that,
to validate them, and that's asking too much of your partner. It's asking too much.
Okay, so you said something, and I really think it's critical, because I hear this all the time. And of course, it's very easy for me to stand outside with my clients and see it. It's a whole lot harder when it's happening with me. But that's
absolutely.
The difference between how to be able to accept that my partner doesn't approve, is either disappointed or doesn't approve of something that I have done or am doing, but that's not the same thing as rejecting me.
That's correct. And, you even have to, and, you can agree or disagree with their approval or disapproval, right? But it is not rejection. And I really talk a lot about the difference between describing an act and characterizing it. When you say your husband is rejecting you, that is a characterization of his action. That is likely not a description of what he said. What he said was, I don't like this, I don't like that. That's what he said. That's the description of it. But your characterization of it as a rejection really points right back to you, Leslie. Right back to you.
I think that is such a critical differentiation.
Absolutely critical. And people don't really, right. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm interrupting you.
It goes to the stories that we tell ourselves.
Exactly. Oh, that's exactly right. And I have, of course, that's well articulated in the book, but it's also, I've got a list of my posts on, let me see if I disagree. I don't know whether, I guess it may be disagreements are not conflicts. No, that's not it. I can't figure out.
Thank you for saying that. That's my whole thing. Is like people are going to disagree. That doesn't mean they're in conflict. Oh, thank you.
Exactly. That is so. That's another kind of thing. But I can't remember which one it is. But there is a whole, even a chart. And I think I did this on a post on Good Men Project too, about the difference between characterizing and describing, and gave several examples of that.
Oh,
and talked about the importance of that.
Yeah, that is such a critical thing, and it's actually, and I think it's actually what gets people in trouble, and it builds the walls between them. Is that instead of describing an incident, I love that we're characterizing it. We're putting kind of harder view on it.
And what happens and that really, when that happens, you are in conflict. There's no longer a disagreement. It's a conflict because you are characterizing it, and that's what your experience of it is. Your partner is sitting there and saying, "What the hell is going on here?"
Right.
All I did was say I didn't like that, and I think then what you create is the unfortunate opportunity that your partner then says, "You're nuts," right? Where did that come from? I'm out of here.
Right. And
so
I love the description of all of this as a process. And,
yes.
And I know that, we're running out of time, and I wish we could continue this conversation. But you're talking about that by following some of these things that we've been talking about, the self-analysis, the self-disclosure,
yes.
the paying attention, the just being present, not having to fix or tell ourselves bizarre stories based on our own past experiences, that this is how couples can actually really build the intimacy that I think most people get married to have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of other reasons. I mean, that's that personal part of marriage, is that intimacy. I mean, you get married to have kids and to help each other, support each other in your life goals and so forth and so on. But intimacy is what will enhance the ability to accomplish all of those things, is the nature of that interpersonal process between the two of you enhances your ability to, in fact, each of you individually and simultaneously to accomplish your own life plans.
Well, that's fantastic, and I know that all of that information is in the book, so can you please tell people where they can get your book, and also where they can read more of your posts and your great knowledge on this subject?
The book is, of course, A Marriage of Equals: How to Achieve Balance in a Committed Relationship. I'm really interested in relationships that are equal, committed, and sustainable over time. And the easiest way to get the book is through Amazon, but you can get it it's available oftentimes through a local bookstore if you prefer not to buy from Amazon as I do. But you can get it and you can go Google it, and you can find all kinds of book sources where you can buy it. And the other thing is I have an ongoing blog that is called A Marriage of Equals on Psychology Today. And the best way to access those are probably just to go on Psychology Today, and then when you have the search element, just search my name and it'll show up.
Terrific. So what I want people to take away is that intimacy has been defined as into, me, you, see. So most of us long to be seen and accepted, especially by our spouses. And unfortunately, as we've been talking about today, a lot of our behaviors keep that from happening. But Dr. Aponte has clearly given us a path to creating intimate, interpersonal interactions that will change that. So I hope you found this conversation as valuable as I did. And until next week, stay loving.